Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. For this week's episode, I spoke to the writer behind one of Hollywood's most influential newsletters. By the time Richard Rushfield launched his newsletter, The Anchor, in 2017, he had held journalism jobs at several major media companies that included the Los Angeles Times, BuzzFeed, and Gawker. But because he served as a behind-the-scenes editor in most of these roles, he didn't have much of a personal brand to speak of, which meant he needed to build a newsletter readership from the ground up. Despite these headwinds, Richard managed to replace his full-time salary within about 2 years, and The Anchor is now a must-read for virtually every Hollywood studio executive. In our interview, he explained how he built his audience and why he prefers his life as an independent writer much more than his past career as a traditional journalist. Before we jump into the interview, I want to talk about my Substack newsletter. Look, if you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you know it doesn't carry any advertising. You also know I put a lot of effort into finding the best possible guests who are able to provide insights that will help you in your career. There's only one way to support the work I do here, and it's by becoming a subscriber to my Substack newsletter. Please don't take it for granted that this podcast will continue to be published each week. Without your support, its future is far from certain. To subscribe, go to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. Okay, on to my interview with Richard. Hey, Richard, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you have, a very long and eclectic career covering the entertainment industry as a journalist. Like you've been doing it for the better part of 20 years. How did you first start covering the industry?
Well, I was a magazine journalist in my first life before the internet. And being in LA, the Hollywood is kind of the gravitational pull that sucks everybody in. And in the internet after my career, when I was working at the LA Times, sort of building their website when they were just starting to have a website, and I took on the entertainment portfolio there as it seemed a place to do something different and exciting and big. And I just got into the subject, and from there in, that's been my focus.
What do you mean that you were hired to build the website? Like, were you actually like programming the website, or you were like a project manager, or what does that mean?
So the LA Times, it was this was in the early 2000s, I think about 2002, and they'd had a very rudimentary website, but it had been largely paywalled, and it wasn't that long from when they had been on GeoCities there, and it was at the point where I think of the newspaper websites that people read in Los Angeles, it ranked 17th, so more people in Los Angeles were looking at the Boston Globe website than we're looking at the LA Times website. So the team of people to basically pull the website up to what was then the modern age, and I was kind of creating original web content and everything, which was very controversial back then. So I was editing and writing some of that.
Oh, so they hired you to create content for the website.
Yeah, great content. And we did a lot of experiments with different things that seemed very revolutionary in those days. Like starting to have blogs on the website, which when I first got there, the editor-in-chief of the paper said, "We do not have blogs in the LA Times. You will not use the word blogs in this building." Eventually that changed.
Yeah. Didn't they? It eventually hired a blog editor, Tony Pierce.
That's correct. Yeah, I worked with Tony there, and they came a long way in a short period of time there.
So you, in terms of kind of creating various kinds of web content, you sort of accidentally fell into the entertainment beat, and then you started. You were doing a lot of writing, or were you mainly editing on the entertainment side?
So most of the internet half of my career has been mostly editing. I edited there, and then I made a tour of the internet, and I went to all the websites, as I like to say, and it was my jobs were about 80% editing and 20% writing, I'd say.
Yeah, and the part of the right. So let's talk about some of the stuff that you covered because you were kind of turning. You were covering entertainment when it was like evolving very quickly. One of the big things you covered was American Idol, right? And you said that
Yeah.
you told me that you learned a ton about the entertainment industry just by covering it. Why was it such a great microcosm for you understanding how the entertainment industry worked?
Well, I took on the American Idol portfolio. We did what we called show tracking there, which later became recapping, as was known. But I said I'd take on the American Idol thing, and the idea was to sort of write an article about people take on different shows and write an article about them each week. And at the time, American Idol was in its sixth season, so it was the biggest show on TV. So it seemed like a interesting thing place to go. And then I sort of, through the entree of the LA Times, I was able to go and attend the tapings and hang around the set and talk to people. And I just became very interested in it as an example of how just seeing how producing two live shows a week for a giant audience. And I spent 3 years sort of going to every taping of it. God help me, and I met not just the contestants, but I did profiles of the makeup artist, the lighting guy, of the I think of the lawyer who handled it, of the producers, of the stage manager, and I just got to learn about all the elements that come in to put in to create such a production for this, and really made me appreciate the craftsmanship and the decisions that go into something like that.
Was it more intricate of a system than you had maybe thought it was prior to covering it?
I mean, there were things you don't even think about, like so there was a Steadicam guy who was like, so you're an American Idol, if you can picture the performers on stage and the audience in the pit in front of him around, and there's a Steadicam guy who sort of walks backwards filming all this through the crowd and through these choreographed production numbers. But beyond that, there's a Steadicam. The Steadicam is on a cord, so there's someone behind the Steadicam has to be unfurling and refurling the cord as he goes, so that knowing how the whole movements will go, and so that nobody trips on it and nobody gets on it. And it's just such a technical, that tiny little thing, just being the person who unfurls the Steadicam guy's cord is like you just have to have decades of experience to be able to do that on a lot in live television, and but having that person makes such a difference. And it made me appreciate that what Hollywood was a collection of these people who have really highly developed skills in really precise areas. And that's why when you film something in Hollywood, you can hire the guy who knows how to unfurl the Steadicam guy's cord on live TV. That allows the Steadicam guy to whirl through the crowd and do all sorts of other things, and just makes it a much richer experience.
And then when you were at the LA Times, you also helped break the Lonely Girl 15 story. So like just for
Yes.
my listeners who are too young, Lonely Girl 15 was like one of the original YouTube vlogs about this girl, and she lots of people watched her online, and then it eventually emerged that this was completely an act. It was completely staged. This wasn't, she was an actress. You tell me, like, how did you break that story?
So like you say, it was they called it a vlog then, and then everybody was saying this was going to be the future of entertainment. These vlogs, and she was the first person. People were life vloggers at that time, and this was the first one that attracted this huge sort of mass following on an ongoing basis. And it was this teenage girl talking from the living room of her home, and talking about her life, which there were some elements there were suggestions that maybe her family was in a cult or something like that, and the world, and it purported to be real. There was no indication that this was anything but an actual teenage girl just talking about her life in school and friends and all that. But nobody could find the girl, and nobody could find where this was coming from. So it became this amongst amongst fans and reporters, it became this obsession to figure out who she was, and I dove in and spent it took about 3 months. I said we must crack this case. The way it came, there was a variety of things that came together. The critical link was they used a song in one of the videos, and the song was by an unsigned band based in Los Angeles. And I had a crazy wall on my office that made all these links and laid all this out. So
like you were conspiracy theorists tracking this 15-year-old girl.
It was beyond wild. And the song they used was by this unsigned band from Los Angeles. So, and yeah, this girl in the video seems to be just a little small town girl off somewhere. So the first thing you say, oh, that's odd. She's using a song by an LA unsigned band, and then found out that the manager of the separately, we had found out the name Lonely Girl 15 had been copyrighted, and by a lawyer in Los Angeles, and by going into people's MySpace pages and finding their connections, we realized that the lawyer who copyrighted it had a daughter who went to school with the manager of what was in the same class at the same school with the manager of the unsigned band. So we suddenly had this Los Angeles connection that sort of suggested strongly she wasn't just about proof she wasn't just some small town girl doing this totally separate from the entertainment industry there. That was the first.
And that was like a big, huge viral story. Did she go on to act in other things, or was that basically the most famous thing she was ever in?
Her name was Jessica Rose, very talented. She got she got a bunch of parts, and she had a lot of. I think she's gone back to her native New Zealand now, and I think she may teach acting. Her career didn't take off completely, but she did get work from that.
So you've worked for both digital upstarts like Gawker and BuzzFeed, but also obviously traditional companies like the LA Times. Did you feel like there was any difference in how you're able to do your job? Like, did you like one more than the other? Like, I've heard that Gawker was a very kind of free-flowing site where you basically could cover whatever you wanted to a certain extent. What did you like about, working for these different kinds of companies?
When the internet first came along, I liked very much the freedom of this was at the height of print publishing when they just had unlimited resources and huge newsrooms and all that. And with all that were huge bureaucracies and codes and what you could say and what you couldn't say. If you were young back then and you were getting started, on one sense, you had security because there was a ladder to climb up. But if you wanted to say something like whether you liked a movie or not, there was no place for you in traditional publishing to say that unless you were the official magazine or newspaper movie critic, who was presumably someone who had been reporting on movies for 20 or so years and all that. So it was very frustrating. So the internet, so having all these blogs and these new companies was an enormous sense of freedom and everything. The problem was on the other side of those that they became there was never for most of them a great financial model, and they became very desperate to attract huge amounts of huge audiences and everything. And when you're at a company that's desperate to find a model to survive at, life gets hard for everybody there. So went through a lot of that side of that too.
Yeah, and that's eventually why you struck off on your own, because you felt like you were going up against ever greater page view quotas and having to do clickbait and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, it was just the economics of the last version this of how to make a website pay was through programmatic ads and Facebook ads and Google ads, and you needed sites needed to have so many millions of people come to them every month to just sort of break even with a skeleton crew. It just became to get that kind of audience regularly. It became just this game of like clickbait and optimizing your Facebook pages and all this other stuff that was about anything other than just doing good quality work. And there was no longer building an audience, and the idea of building an audience and having a loyal readership that was with you on journey. It was just about grab people with a headline any way you can, whether it's bought crowds or just a word, a very sensational word, and it's just not. It was not a satisfying way to be living as a writer and editor.
Yeah, at least for some sites. So I feel like entertainment coverage has evolved so much in the last 20 years as you've been, the time that you've been a journalist, covering the industry. Like 20 years ago, you maybe had like a local film reviewer at your local newspaper, and then maybe you could catch like a short snippet of a review on like NPR or on the nightly news. And like now there are just thousands of YouTube channels and podcasts and blogs covering, every aspect of entertainment. Like one of my favorite film podcasts is just that, like three guys sitting around a mic and talking about, what they've been watching that week for 2 hours straight. I watch a couple of YouTube series, one like Nerd Writer that does like these like really, esoteric analysis video essays of films. I watch another one called Pitch Meetings, where they basically make fun of the writing of a film. I have two friends who had a podcast focused solely on Kubrick films, and it had thousands of listeners. Like, does that excite you about how entertainment coverage has evolved over the last 20 years?
On one level, yeah. People are doing interesting things that really speak to a certain community or certain people for their needs, and all those things you mentioned, they all grow, and they got to whatever place they got because people liked them, and because people presumably told their friends that they liked them and passed them along. And I always say that if in journalism and everything, if you don't like what you're doing, you're not going to be very good at it. And if you do like what you're doing, you have a much better chance of being great at it than you do. And so when people are doing things they're passionate about, they're often doing their best work. The problem is that things get so siloed and in these little spaces that it becomes hard to have the larger conversations and to support the larger the sort of broader coverage that needs to happen to keep an industry vital. But for what all those things are, I think it's terrific that they have the opportunity to do that.
Well, you got to do that, right? So you sometime around, I think, like 2017, you were fed up with, making slideshows and other kind of clickbaity things. You wanted to just focus on stuff that you thought that mattered. You eventually launched a newsletter. I don't know was it called The Ankler at first, or was that what it was called from the very beginning?
Yeah, it was immediately called The Ankler. Which for those who don't know, The Ankler refers to it's variety speak. Variety used to have its own language that they wrote. The trade magazine used to have its own language that they wrote their headlines in. And ankler when ankle was the word that they had invented for when someone left a company and it was not clear whether they were fired or quit. They were said to have ankled. So that became the name of the thing I started, The Ankler.
And so you didn't have, like, some of these journalists who leave and go to Substack, they have these huge online brands. Like, you think like Matt Iglesias has like 500,000 Twitter followers. Even though you had been covering entertainment for a long time, you had mostly been on the editor side. So when you launched a newsletter, it wasn't like you had some huge internet presence, internet brand that was able to like send a lot of followers to the newsletter, right?
Yeah, not at all. I had mostly been an editor for the 10 years previous to that, which means you're mostly invisible to everybody except a few other journalism professionals who have had lunch with you or something. So I didn't have any following at all, and I just started it off. I saw that there was this opportunity to do something in entertainment coverage that was more interesting, and I felt that the trades that were covering it weren't doing it. So I just had this thought, like, if I could do something as interesting enough for 2,000 people who this is their business, the trades, would they pay for it? And that was what I kind of set out to do. And I just started out. I didn't.
And it started with
Yeah.
like a soft launch, right? Like you didn't even try to grow the audience at first. You were just sending it to a few friends.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't exactly know what it was going to be, or what it's ended up now is it's a lot of essays and takes about the entertainment uh, industry. But when I started off, I was like just writing reviews of whatever I watched on TV last night, or doing lists of 10 great submarine movies, or whatever. It was kind of all over the place. So I took a while to find my voice, and I knew I wasn't ready to launch this as a product yet. So I started it out. The first week I sent it to 5 friends. I said, "Here's a description of this. Could you just read it and tell me what you think of it?" And then I added on five more the next week, and then 5 more the week after that. And I began to find the voice and the space and figure out how much time I was. It really took me to put one of these out. And when I first started, I thought I said I was going to do this twice a day, and quickly discovered that was impossible for me because I'm a painfully slow writer. Um, and so it grew, and I think I had about 50 people, 50 friends that were reading it, and I had asked them to all keep it a secret, and then I said, okay, if you like this, go ahead and pass it along to people, tell people to subscribe. And then by word of mouth, it took off. And about 9 months later, about 9 months after I launched that first one, I finally brought down the paywall.
Hmm. So what was the voice you initially settled on? Like I've read a few issues. It seems like you're kind of like come at it as like an insider who is covering entertainment and somewhat lifting the veil to help people understand what's going on behind the scenes. Explain to me like what do people get from yours that they wouldn't get from like a general interest entertainment site?
Yeah, I just think it's so it was started a sense that the people covering the entertainment industry, it had become very safe, protected. They couldn't say things that were at all that would ruffle any feathers. That they had become very beholden to the industry that they were covering. So the idea was that someone is just asking the questions that nobody else is asking, and just saying what they think, like say like this movie looks like, if you think this movie is looks like it's going to be a bomb, just saying that, but doing it from a place of that I was informed, and I had the experience of having covered this industry and knowing about it, and so I wasn't just a random person saying I hated that trailer, but talking talking from the perspective of someone who knows the industry to professionals who are working in it. So it sort of became this kind of disgruntled, sarcastic voice on the industry coverage scene.
How much are you talking behind the scenes to people in the industry, and how is that those conversations making their way into the newsletter?
I talk a lot. I have, one of the things as it took off is that people started reaching out to me, and started telling me things. They started giving me tips about stuff that was going on and all that. But even more importantly, they started giving me their insight about what was happening and how I should look at it, this, and what was the real story behind this story that just came out, and how things were evolving. And I kind of feel like the newsletter is kind of the I knew. I think I knew. Before when I started doing this, I knew more than people who had never written about the industry professionally. But there was still a lot I didn't know, and I feel like this newsletter has kind of been the education of Richard Rushfield in a way, like learning about the industry and what really matters, and asking the stupid questions and finding it out. And there's been a lot of people that have talked to me that have kind of led me through that process.
And then, so you launched the paywall version of it at around the 9-month mark. You said this was all before you eventually moved over to the Substack, but in the beginning, you were cobbling together a couple different services, right?
Yeah, it was so. I launched before Substack did, and I was part of this accelerator program from the Information, which is sort of the giant newsletter. They had this accelerator program, and I was already up and running when I joined it. And then the guys, Hamish and Chris, who the founders of Substack, came in and talked about this thing they were going to launch, and said, "Man, wish I had that when I launched, because you had to cobble together." It was based on MailChimp, plus you had a WordPress site, and then you had Stripe to process the payments, and then you had to have a different service to mediate between between all the other services to keep your list together and everything. And none of those things connected well, and they worked well. And I know just like enough about tech to be very dangerous to myself and think I can fix all these problems, which just led to all sorts of nightmares and crashes. And it was a real Frankenstein's monster for the first year and a half or so of services, and replacing them and trying to put up new ones. And it's a nightmare.
And Substack when you moved to Substack, that simplified everything.
Yeah, when I moved to Substack, it just became instantly. It was all just seamless. It was on the website. The website was on one site. The payment processing, it replaced 4 services with one. And most importantly, to anyone who's thinking of charging, and you're not on and you're putting together your own thing, a huge part of your life is going to be spent devoted to like tracking down someone says, "Why was my credit card charged twice?" Explaining spam filters to people. Someone saying, "I told you a month ago I wanted to unsubscribe. I got another one. How come you're still sending me this when I don't want it anymore?" And it was a good third of my time was devoted to just sort of rudimentary customer service, and Substack also took that over.
Yeah. And you see like all these criticisms of Substack now where they're like, "Oh, why would you give Substack 10% of everything you make when you could just go off and do and cobble together all these services together and pay like a fraction?" And people, I think, just vastly overestimate or underestimate how much people like you and me, we just want to focus on the content. We want something that's super convenient and easy to use, and we're more than willing to just pay a service just to take care of all that for us so we can focus just on the content.
I mean, I would just say it's doing the math. Literally, that stuff was a third of my time, just customer service. I'm not even counting when you had the days when every year when you had to reload the new SSL certificate, which if you're not a tech person, you ever want a good time, that's going to be the worst day of your year. So mark your calendar for that. But just customer service was about a third of my time. So to give 10% of your money to get a third of your time back is, by my calculation, a winning proposition.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. So talk about the newsletter as it is today. How much content do you put out for free now, and how much is paid?
So pre-COVID, I was doing 2 or 3 emails a week. And I would I'd make one of them free, like once a week, every other week. I'd try to find one that was like of a sort of general interest topic. If I was like talking about the Oscar night or something like that, I would try to make that one. And then the rest are for the paid subscribers. I put out a little preview issue for the people, the free signups, where I give them like 2 paragraphs of the beginning of it, and they can subscribe to get the rest of it.
So to talk about that, like obviously every user journey is slightly different, but like what's the typical user journey for how someone becomes a paying subscriber for you? Are they just coming through a free article, signing up for the newsletter, and then where are they converting? Like, what's
So
your biggest
generally,
driver of conversions?
I think so. So most of my readers are professionals in the entertainment industry. So generally, I would say most of them they found it because someone has forwarded them an issue of mine, and they want to send it. And then they almost all start out signing up for the free edition just to see what it is before they dive in. They get the free edition. So if I put out an issue, just to give so if I put out an issue and it gets me 100 free signups, then the next issue I put out, the people that get those people get the little preview of a couple paragraphs, and of those 100, maybe 10 will convert to becoming paid subscribers. Is kind of how it works.
So you'll publish an article for free, and then you'll publish a paid version of the article, and then what? Will you email the free only list with just that list with a snippet or something? Like, explain how the mechanics of that work.
Yeah, so I publish the whole thing, and it goes out to all the paid subscribers, and they get it first. And then I'll take the first two paragraphs of that. Sometimes I'll be generous and make it 4 paragraphs, and send it as a little teaser. I call it the preview edition to all the free signups, and it gives them here's what the new issue is, and then I do a little thing. Also in this issue, you'll see, and I give little snippets of that. And to read it all, subscribe today right here.
Yeah. So for people who aren't familiar with Substack system, you have like 3 main options for sending. You can send to everybody, so people on your free list and your paid list, but you can also send specifically to just people on your paid list and just people on your free list. So to explain what Richard is saying is, like, he'll send out a full article to the paid list, and then he'll send a much smaller kind of truncated preview to the free only list to try to entice them into becoming paid subscribers. I'm describing that correctly, right?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
It's confusing, and it confuses people. It was even more confusing when I was doing it on MailChimp, and you had to like see who the new people signed up were and check whether they had a previous subscription and cancel that for them. Otherwise, they get 2 and they get mad about why are you sending me 2? I was getting 1. I shouldn't be getting the previous. So
Yeah.
it's confusing, but it was even more confusing before.
How much do you charge for the newsletter?
So I charge $10 a month or $90 a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty standard. And so you launched the paywall 9 months after starting the free one. How long after that did it take to become like a sustainable business?
So I'd say at year one, it was. At year one, I would say it was. I mean, a sustainable business. The only thing the business needed to sustain was me and the family I support. So there's no. I don't have any other employees or offices or anything. So it's just like, was this enough for me to live on? And I'd say by year one, it was kind of halfway there. By year 2, it was enough to live on. And now in year 3, we're doing well.
Uh-huh. And you also started eventually taking sponsorships. How do those work?
So those are things that sort of came in on the transit of me. In Hollywood here, there's a special sector of ads called For Your Consideration, which is a unique thing that they actually don't care how much traffic you get, because if an advertiser cared how much traffic I get compared to sites that get millions, I have subscribers in the low thousands. So it's not a lot of traffic, but the For Your Consideration ads, it's ad campaigns aimed at members of the Academy of Motion Pictures or TV to help them try to win awards, and those just kind of fell in all over the transom after a certain time. They contacted me and said, "Can we buy an ad there?" And I came up with a price, I sell a few of those just sort of. I don't really solicit or go out for them, but a few of them come in, and I do run them now.
And is that like mainly just seasonal, or are those run year round?
It is seasonal, but the Oscar season now is about 7 months long, and then there's the Emmy season, which is about 4 months long. So it's seasonal, but the two seasons between them cover 11 months of the year. So.
Uh-huh. And are they just supplying you with like an image, like a for your consideration image, or are they giving you copy that you're running as like native content?
No. I don't. People have inquired about that, but I don't do anything. I just take a JPEG and different sizes and can make it link back to their page, and that's as complicated. You can't on Substack wrap the site. You can't do big banners at the top, but so it's just I take a JPEG and I put it into between the text
Mm-hmm.
and put the advertisement disclaimer with it. So.
Yeah. So you've had like a pretty wide spanning career of working for traditional media and then kind of digital upstarts like Gawker and BuzzFeed, and now this kind of rising so-called creator economy, which includes everything from like indie podcasters and YouTubers to writers like yourself on Substack. What do you think? What kind of effect do you think this is having on the media in terms of like people being able to cover their true interests, their true passions? Like, do you think that this is having like an overall positive effect on the media ecosystem?
I mean, I think whenever there's competition for good people, if institutions are smart, they should that it would have a positive impact. That they would look at this as like, what do we have to do to make to compete with great writing and with voices that people are willing to pay for. Some people will look at it as like they're just stealing things from the New York Times. I mean, in my case, what I'm doing is a contrarian take on it. So by definition, there was no place for this in the trade universe. Like this, what I'm doing, like this couldn't have survived at the trades, which is the world I live in. So if this was going to, if I was going to be able to make a living doing this, it was only going to have to be out on my own. So without that, the other one. But I think any place that gives room for people to create products around and publications around their voices that can find audiences that it's meaningful for is a good thing.
So would you ever go back to work for traditional media again? Like, let's say the New York Times Magazine comes to you and says, Richard, you've built out this great online brand that's very valuable, and also this knowledge. We like your writing. We want you to quit the Ankler, and we want you to write a weekly column for the New York Times Magazine. Would you consider that?
I mean, it's hard to imagine that offering, but it's hard to. I've been really happy just. The last 3 years that I've been doing this have been the most rewarding of my career, because I'm writing what I want to write. I feel like I'm doing my best work, my most interesting work. I'm not the great thing about a newsletter is I'm not thinking about anyone but the readers. I'm not thinking about like, how do you SEO this? How does this fit in with a larger publication? Whose turf is this? What trouble is this going to get us into? What other deals do we have? When you're an editor, particularly now at a large publication, like everything you do is such a minefield of like the problems it can cause and what it has to do to attract an audience and to build like every article is its own like campaign to build an audience, and I don't have any of that. I'm writing whatever I want. I'm trying to the only bar to me is just I have to make it as interesting as I can, and if I make it boring, and the one thing that you can't do on a newsletter is phone it in and just be boring and predictable, and because that people are taking their time to read this on mostly on their phones, and they've got 5 zillion other emails, and if you start wasting their time with just you're just doing a favor for a friend or something by talking about their company, or you're just writing the same story that they've seen 5,000 other places, it just stands out like a sore thumb, and you're just got it's the one-way ticket to the spam filter if you do that stuff. So it's the only challenge is just keep it always interesting and keep it always vital. And I can't imagine going to work for a place where I have to deal with other priorities than that, and that's not, and that my life isn't dominated by thinking about that. So it's hard to imagine that right now.
Yeah, as someone, I've also worked for more traditional media companies, and I wholeheartedly agree. I don't think I'd ever go back.
It's I mean, in a world, having worked for a lot of them, I've gone in and it always starts with, no, you got to do what you do. You got to challenge us. You got to break down, and you know how that always ends.
Yeah. Okay, Richard. Well, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
Theankler.com. Be glad to see you. Drop me a line.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks for joining us. I'm actually on the lookout for new guests for this podcast, so if you do interesting stuff in digital content, whether you're a full-time YouTuber, a media executive, or run a cool niche newsletter, definitely reach out. My email address is simonowens@gmail.com. Okay, see you next week.